All right, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope you had a fun evening and a great breakfast. Was it good? Good conference? Well, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker this morning. GJ Hart is no stranger to the Hart School. He is our main benefactor. In fact, in 2015, GJ and his wife gave a gift to James Madison University that allowed the Hart School to be the first and still only named school at the university. So I was super excited about that. We are delighted to have GJ as our speaker. GJ started his career right here, actually graduated from Harrisonburg High School, about a block away, and then came to James Madison University. But in between, GJ started to really work in the field of food. He worked for the poultry industry here and quickly rose in that field, and then went on to New Jersey lamb down in Texas, right, GJ?
New Zealand lamb in New York, actually.
In New York, New Zealand lamb in New York. Okay, and then GJ became the president and CEO of Texas Roadhouse, later California Pizza Kitchen, and he has just retired as the president and CEO of Torchy's Tacos. If you have not had Torchy's Tacos, I'm sure they're coming your way. So be on the lookout for that. But I'm thrilled to introduce GJ to you. He is an award-winning leader. He's an excellent speaker and a dear friend to the Hart School and James Madison University. So without further ado, GJ Hart.
Thank you, Cassie. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person today. Little trouble with travel, and I'm sure all of you have experienced that. Trying to come from the West Coast to the East Coast wasn't the easiest, so this was the best next thing. Let me just start off by saying I'm glad to be with you guys today. I hope that in some positive way I can leave an impression on one or many of you in terms of some of my beliefs and philosophies in terms of leadership, and particularly through this most difficult time over the last 2 years with the pandemic. And honestly, I would hope that I can share with you a philosophy around leadership through building and nurturing a best-in-class culture. And that's really the theme of this morning for me, is building a culture that is centric around people and giving people a voice and making sure that they understand where they stand in the organization. And I'll say this now, and I'll probably say it again, is having a great culture in any organization is done by design. It's not done by default. And so it's something that's very much a thought process around how do you lead people to get the maximum benefit from each individual, and how do they feel a part of something, and how they really matter in the company's journey and or vision as they move forward. I've been fortunate over my years, as you heard, now somewhat retired. Let me stop and digress and say retirement for me, it was really being retired from being a CEO, which I've done for over 36 years. It's really, I still want to give back to the industry. I sit on about 8 boards, both philanthropic and for-profit boards, 2 of which are public companies in the restaurant business today. So I do have a continuing hand on hopefully helping the industry as we move forward. So I've had some great companies that I've been able to lead and mold and really set the course of what the future might hold. And as Tassie said to you this morning, the likes of companies like Texas Roadhouse, which is now one of the more successful casual dining public companies in America, to California Pizza Kitchen, which I took over for 7.5 years to do a complete transformation, to most recently Torchy's Tacos, which when I got there was a small regional brand, and now is well over 100 restaurants in 13 states. So so a lot of what I'm talking about, you know, again, everybody has an opinion, and I certainly have mine in terms of how do you manage through and lead through challenges like the pandemic over the last 2 years. And so really, no matter what the situation is, I've found several approaches in my leadership roles that are constant. I've found these approaches are really around courage. They're around having a care and heart and a foundation created on a positive culture within the organization. A culture that's built on people that inspires them to reach new heights, to challenge themselves, cultivates, inspires, and an atmosphere of appreciation that acknowledges and rewards them for their contributions and hard work and their inclusion, feeling like they truly matter. And how do they matter in an organization's vision and its goals? So during my career, I've walked into several situations, some that have a good culture, some that don't have a good culture. But again, culture is by design, not by default. So it starts from the very beginning, and it's being able to get out amongst the people. It's being out and listening more than anything else, and really starting to develop a dialogue with folks where they start to understand that their voice really does matter, and they test you on that every which way. But it's one where once you start that dialogue, that over time, and you're genuine around it, that people will start to trust. And make no mistake, from my perspective, trust is earned over time. It's certainly not earned from the day you walk in. So being able to lead an organization, create a unique environment where culture can thrive is not always the easiest. It's a constant work, and it's constant thought process to make sure that you're aligning the people with those goals. It's also coming around a positive approach, a common vision, mission, and core values of the organization. Caring for people, nurturing a company's culture is, as I said, it's a full-time job, and it's one that takes commitment through and through, even in times of adversity. So let me just start off by saying it's pretty simple. I'm sure many of you have heard it before, that these 4 bullet points, it's right people, treat them right, train them right, and ultimately give them a voice. And through that, establish a clear vision of the organization. What do I mean by clear vision? You know, so many organizations, if you think about it, have mission statements that are 2 paragraphs or 1 paragraph long. They sit behind a receptionist desk, and people really don't understand what that is. To me, it's vitally important that the mission of the company incorporates the voices of all the people in the organization to set what the North Star of the organization might be. And I think it's better to keep that simple, like at Texas Roadhouse. It's really simple. It's 4 words, 2 are the same: legendary food and legendary service. In the case of Torchy's Tacos, be damn good is something that's in all the restaurants. It started with, in the early days when it was in a trailer, where people would say, man, these tacos are damn good. And it became the moniker of the organization. And in the mission of Torchy's is just be damn good, or be damn great, if you will. So it's making sure that you set that clear vision, and that people have a part of what that vision and mission might be. And then ultimately, you start to carry that out through that gathering around the North Star, and making sure people that have the opportunity to have their voice heard. And then, you know, the vision supports the mission statement. So in the case of Torchy's, where it was be damn good as the mission, the vision was really about serving people the very best damn tacos. And, you know, I could take you through each of those organizations. It's real simple, real hard to do, but it makes people all throughout the organization. If you carry that through, then ultimately people will have a framework, a North Star from which they can operate. And then underneath all that, it's what do we value and what's important, and really being true to that. So in the case where you've got a mission and you've got a vision, what are the values that drive that organization, whatever that might be? And again, it's one of those where the people must and feel like they've had a voice in what those core values are. And the way I like to describe it is, if you have a simple, easy mission statement to say and remember, it's very hard to do, and it's anchored by the core values of the organization, then ultimately, when people are left to their own devices, to people, you can't micromanage every single person. In the case of Texas Roadhouse, there's over 60,000 team members, that you want to have a framework which they can make a decision. And usually, and almost always, that is driven by those core values. So in the case of Torchy's, the core values were very simple. It was on the acronym of TORCH. So it was tenacity, originality, respect, community, and honor. And again, it really doesn't matter what those words are. It's that you live by those words, and people in the organization believe it, and they ultimately make decisions as a result of it. And again, as I said, as people feel a part of something bigger than themselves, I think in today's environment, young people want to have a higher purpose than just a living wage or wage, and they go to work and they go home and that's life. They want to be a part of something bigger, something that they can believe in, and something that they aligns with the things that are important to them. So again, that's a never-ending battle from a culture perspective, because if you're going to give people a voice and you are trying to get them to understand why they matter, then ultimately it's not always going to be rosy. It's going to be ups and downs, and you need to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, and need to be able to react to all those things and bring people together. And all of that bringing people together, to me, is around what the mission, vision, and the values of the organization are. Once you do all that, then it's what are those key business objectives? What are those objectives that you want to clearly define so that you can go after it? Because make no mistake about it, having a great culture where people are the center of the universe and where their voice really does matter doesn't mean you don't have high standards. It doesn't mean you don't have accountability. It doesn't mean you don't have goals, because you do on all those things to be able to move the business forward. But if it's anchored around people and you treat them right, you train them right, and you bring them around the horn, then ultimately the organization will thrive. And then as you move forward, you develop what those business objectives are. You cultivate trust and transparency. And again, as I said, trust is earned over time. It's certainly not something you get from the very beginning, but it's continuing to foster a culture of trust and transparency, and being able to communicate openly and honestly. And that trust goes both ways. And that ultimately communication goes both ways. And great leaders, I believe, create that environment. And when they feel that things are getting off kilter from what the mission, vision, and values of the organization are, that they step back in and bring it back into balance by reminding people the very issues or the very things that they believe in, that they've all been able to put together around those mission, vision, and values, and making sure that they keep the company and the organization going forward to their North Star. You know, I've been asked the question through COVID. In the restaurant business, we were in a position where our business was basically people coming in and dining in, or people taking food away through the counter. And that business did not have things like third-party DoorDash, et cetera. It didn't have curbside at all, because the locations were not conducive to that. And how do you react to a situation where you take about 50% of your team members and you lay them off as a result of the pandemic? Well, you know, one of the ways we did it, we continued to communicate openly and honestly. What are the confronting the brutal facts of what was really going on, what we needed to do to recover? How do we make sure that we're taking care of not only those people that were laid off, but the team members within the organization that are left? How do you adapt to an environment that your business model really is not conducive to? And I will tell you, it all comes back to trust, transparency, being out there, role modeling and behavior, and staying in constant communication in the spirit of trust and transparency of what really is going on and what do we need to do about it, and then allow people to be able to empower the people to react to those environments. I mean, on our particular case, the reason we were successful was because we got out in front on things like selling alcohol to go, or to having family packs, which we never had done before, or creating curbside where there was no curbside, where you literally had to move the point of purchase, point of sale registers outside. You had to run cable wires, and we didn't have people running around from the corporate headquarters doing that. They had to figure it out themselves, because we had to react so quickly. And believe it or not, because of the fact that we would communicate the good, the bad, the ugly. We get that feedback on a daily basis and empower the people to go out and do what's right. And having a foundation where people really do matter, I think is what got Torchy's through the pandemic in such a great way. And the end result for us was that we had actually done a financing during COVID, which was very, very successful and increased the value of the organization by more than double. We also opened 12 restaurants during the pandemic, or through the first year of the pandemic. And we brought back every single team member that wanted to be brought back into the organization as we started to move and adjust around COVID. And again, I credit all of that back to having open communication, a culture where people really do feel a part of something bigger than themselves. Now, examples of how that open communication can work are things like getting out, doing field tours, going to visit restaurants, being out in front of the people and not behind some camera like I am today, but really getting out there to hear their voices, make sure that they feel a part of something bigger than themselves. We would do things like, do we continue to communicate around all of our single unit operators, which we call managing partners, where they actually are the top operations people, and we'd sit down with every senior leader of the organization on a quarterly basis to make sure that we're tackling the issues of the day for the people that are out there operating our restaurants. We also would bring people together in conferences where we would celebrate, and it's really about celebrating each other, being with each other, not trying to educate and give a whole bunch of information that people only retain a small bit. So there's all kinds of examples of how you can continually communicate and get out in front of people. But I can tell you that in our particular case, being out there was vitally important for our success coming through COVID. So one of the things I would say to you as well is that throughout all my leadership roles, that at the end of the day, being in the hospitality business and having as many team members as we did is that we believe that if we took care of the people, the team members in the organization, they would carry out and take care of the guests who are coming to dine with us. And I believe that philosophical belief is something that works in every organization. At the end of the day, if you take care of the people that are taking care of the guests, then you have the chance or a higher chance of success. Then the next part of this is really being able to celebrate, recognize, and reward people for doing great work. And again, this goes back to setting targets, setting goals, and being able to take every opportunity when when a person achieves success, that you're cheering them on, that you recognize them in front of the organization, so they again feel part of something really special. I'll tell you, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that in organizations, when things are going in the right direction, when the team members are cheering themselves on or each other on, versus having to be the leader and creating environments where you cheer and recognize and reward people. And then I believe that a great leader never misses the opportunity to recognize and reward people, whatever, how big or how little. It's just the fact that you take those few minutes to celebrate that person, which I think is all inspiring. I've had the great opportunity to do that so many times when a person is just taken back by the fact that they're being recognized for what their job is, or going above and beyond their job, or doing things that align with the mission, vision, and values of the organization. So again, I think when you put a people first mentality, then you continue to cheer people on. It's something that will ultimately make that organization successful. And again, as I said, recognize, reward isn't always about the biggest things, although in my career, we've made awards for the operator of the year in the restaurant business. The key in the center of the universe is that single unit operator that is on the front lines every single day. They have to open up that business 7 days a week and operate in a way that's aligned with the organization's business goals. And so when you do that, we would have an award for the operator of the year, which was pretty significant. It was the largest cash prize. They'd get a leased car for 2 years. They get money to be able to work on their favorite philanthropic effort with their team members, and also some money to recognize all the team members within that within that restaurant. Although there's other things, there's ways we would use coins that really have the core values of the organization. Simple coin, it's used in the military quite a bit. And it's a way of bringing camaraderie and recognizing someone that you're part of something bigger than yourselves and something very, very special. Or it's just simple rewards and recognize in front of their peers. And again, as I said, that recognize reward piece is vitally important. Ultimately, that enhances the culture, shows genuine appreciation for people that are producing positive results, high standards, and inspires them to dream bigger across the whole organization. So let me just go on from there and just say that there are 6 steps of leadership that have led me through all the years of my career. And certainly I've had an interesting career in the restaurant business. It's been very good to me, but I've used these 6 philosophical beliefs with every level of the organizations. And again, these are my views, and certainly there are people that do it a different way. But from my perspective, that these 6 steps are things that are vitally important. The first one is to be the best that you can be, and this may be a bit of a surprise. I ultimately believe that our job as leaders in anything that you do is to get the people that you lead to exceed their own expectations. And if you think about that for a minute, how do you get someone to exceed their own expectations? If they have a certain vision of themselves on what they may be able to get done or do, they may be, thinking they've got to do this particular task or role for the rest of their lives. Or you may have that person who's very inspired and wants to go on and run the organization. But at the end of the day, our job as leaders is create an environment where people can thrive and that they can exceed their own expectations. Well, there's only one way you can do that, in my mind, is that you continually become better yourself. You continue to learn every day in everything that you do, so that ultimately you can be a better leader to the people that you lead. So it's being the best that you can. It doesn't say win at all costs. It means be better today than you were yesterday, and be better tomorrow than you were today. And you do that with constant learning. And I tell you, the person who said that best to me was Coach John Wooden. Hopefully most of you know who John Wooden was. In my mind, he's the greatest basketball coach in the history of college basketball. And he led that very way. It wasn't win at all costs, but be the best that you can be. The second step is in these leadership traits are to dream big. And you might say, okay, what's that got to do with leadership? But to me, it's ultimately having goals, having aspirations for something bigger. I don't care what that is. If you're dreaming that you want to be, something down the road, or having hopes and dreams that you want a bigger house or bigger car or whatever. And again, I'm talking about team members that ultimately are leaders in the organization, is to dream big and to reach above and beyond the boundaries of what you know today. And again, the greatest successful people in life, they ultimately tell you that it's through their failures that they became better and bigger. And it's having the ability to get yourself up and say, okay, I have a dream to be bigger than where I am today. And I think that's vitally important in creating hope and an aspiration for people as they move forward. The third step is to lead with your heart. And it's interesting because, it doesn't say you don't have high standards accountability, as I mentioned earlier. It's leading with your heart. If people know that you care and they're smart enough, intuitive enough, and I don't care if you went to Harvard, James Madison University, or you didn't get out of kindergarten, I think people have an innate ability to understand if you really care or don't care for that person. So to me, leading with your heart is something that is um, uh, what people can understand and they see, and it's something that they ultimately can rally behind. Again, if a culture is designed by, or is by design, not by default, all these things are vitally important to be able to have people be a part of the overall mission and vision of the company, because they believe that someone cares about them and does it day in and day out. So leading with your heart. The next one is, once you lead with your heart, you have to trust the people that you lead. And I think there, in so many cases, an individual or team member will test whether or not that's true. And to me, I try to describe this, particularly young first-time leaders, so often, is that you may have come up through the ranks and been promoted from within. You're in a new leadership role and you know the skill very well. But how do you teach it, and how do you role model that behavior so that ultimately people will feel that you've entrusted that particular, whatever it might be, that job gets done in the right manner and the right framework. And so, ultimately, if you trust the people that you lead, sometimes they'll let you down, but more times than not, they'll thrive. They'll come up with new ways. They'll have better success than you did. And again, it goes back to getting people to exceed their own expectations. So I think that it's interesting that if you lead with your heart, or lead with coming, opening up your heart, and then you trust the people that you lead, it's amazing to me how over time I've watched so many people just thrive in that environment, because I think that's what people ultimately want to feel a part of something and feel like they're cared about. The next one is to do the right thing always. As a leader, it is really easy. You say, you have organizations and people will say, well, let's just do the right thing. I can remember all throughout the years, there'll be challenges that come up, and there's rules and regulations. As organizations grow, you have to have those standards from which you live by. But ultimately, what I like to tell people is there isn't a rule for everything. You cannot put enough rules in place to be able to have an organization thrive and reach its ultimate potential, but you have to have them. But sometimes the rules are meant to be broken. And I tell people that it's in situations where, particularly around people, and if you are a culture centered around people and creating a unique environment where people can thrive, then doing the right thing sometimes is very, very difficult to do. The rule says one thing, someone made a mistake, and yet you as a leader believe in that person. You'll stand behind or in front of that person and help them through whatever that issue is. And I use the example that the rule says if you did something bad, assuming you haven't hurt someone else, that the rule says, well, you've done X, Y, and Z, so now you should be let go. When ultimately you've invested in that person, created someone who is aspiring to be better than they are today, that you want to step up and say, well, the rule says this, but I'm going to do the right thing by that person. I want to remind, as I remind people, that ultimately someone helped you, because we all made mistakes. When you're down, someone picked you up, whoever that might be. And ultimately, you as a leader have the opportunity to do that for all the people that you touch and lead. And so doing the right thing is very difficult. It's really easy to talk about, and it takes courage to be able to do the right thing. In all the organizations that I've led, I've had our chief people officer or the HR person. I'd always ask the question when difficult decisions come up is, what's the right thing to do for this particular individual or for the organization? And it's interesting because you get into some quite challenging decisions, and you don't always make the right decisions. But I can say this, that if you're going in with the mentality of doing the right thing, then ultimately you'll win. And then the last piece of these leadership traits is serve the people that you lead. think so many people think that once you go up the ladder in an organization, the higher you go, the easier it gets. No, the responsibility, the ability to have that responsibility and accountability go up significantly. But if you're in a people culture, then ultimately you serve the people that you lead. You clear the path for those folks. You look around the corner what might be coming and what might be ahead of you. And being able to put yourself at the bottom of the organization where you're there to help inspire and serve all the people that you lead, that to me is something that is the only way that you can get the maximum potential and reach that potential by serving the people. Because at the end of the day, if their job is easier, you clear the path, you create an environment or help create an environment where their voice matters, that they really do understand that they can have a voice, whether that's consistent with you as an individual leader, it's okay. But then ultimately, they band together, they're creative, they have the autonomy to go out and do what's necessary and required to move an organization forward. And you know, to me, it's pretty simple. If you're setting the environment, you're serving those people, you're the ultimate winner because the organization thrives and gets better. So serving the people that you lead is really, really important. And then all of that is easy to talk about, hard to do, but all these leadership principles are ones that it takes courage to make those decisions. It takes courage to create an environment where people are allowed to have a voice. It takes courage where you create an environment where people are autonomous enough to come up with creative ways to solve issues, to create new products, to innovate, to fully utilize all the resources of an organization around the people culture is, again, one by design, not by default. And it's one that continually challenges and it ultimately redefines and defines the organization as you move forward. So just like COVID, we took the opportunity to come out of COVID. The theme was, let's come out of COVID stronger than we went into COVID as an organization. And it was centered solely around people and creating an environment where we had an open, transparent dialogue to be able to be in a very challenging situation and yet manage our way through it and ultimately thrive and come out the other end and continue to grow an organization which has been on a high growth trajectory, and one where you know, you're growing in a very decentralized way all over the country versus where the organization was just in a couple of states. So again, all these principles are ones that I've used over the years, and I feel like that, particularly through an environment like COVID, I feel like that it's really come back to manifest itself in the ultimate success of an organization, and in my particular case, the organization that I was leading. So just some thoughts from my perspective around leadership. I'll say that the environment that we're all in today, as we start to hopefully exit or have a new normal coming out through the pandemic, of that being COVID, is that these different philosophical beliefs will allow the organization to pivot and be able to continue to pivot and analyze its business in a way that will be consistent with the overall mission of the company and vision, and ultimately to that success. I know that a few of you folks had talked about some things around that wanted me to address around leadership, and what do we need to do as educators and prepare people and students today to be able to come out this other end of the pandemic. And to me, it's really creating much of these philosophical beliefs where they really do matter, and understand the ultimate goals of an organization, and that they're in an interesting point, because the things that I've been talking about are centered around people and culture. Well, we're now coming through the pandemic, we are in a new normal with how people work. They work more independently, but yet they're part of something bigger than themselves. So I think some of the skills that need to be taught is things like self-motivation and being inspired themselves and taking the time to be proactive and go above and beyond of what their particular role might be, and doing that in a fairly autonomous way, but being part of a bigger organization. I think that's going to be a real trick, because I think this idea of being decentralized and working from different environments is one that's going to probably moderate some, but I think it's one that's here to stay. And it's one that not every single student or a person coming out of school today has the ability or even has the skill set to work, by themselves in their home or whatever that might be, but be a part of a team that ultimately drives the success of the organization. The other thing I would say is that this idea of communication and transparency is really, really important. How you communicate something and you're transparent about it, but yet be respectful, is something that is a trait that not all people have. And first, having the ability and the freedom to feel like you can speak your piece, but doing it in a way that is respectful and gets the message across, is, I think, another piece of learning that I think we need to continually build on as human beings, that we get better at being able to do that. And I also believe that this whole idea of how people present themselves and how they're able to speak in front of big groups of people, I think, are ultimately important. How they represent themselves and whoever they touch, is that, are they carrying the torch of who they are proud of to be? Do they know who they want to be? Do they have aspirations? And do they have a vision of where they want to go? And I go back to, they don't always have those answers, but if they're in an organization that is a people-centric and a culture of which they're a part of and they help create, then they have a better chances of success. And then the last thing I would say is that while I say culture is by design, not by default, culture is owned by every single person in an organization. And they have to believe through and through of what that organization stands for and what their ultimate vision and mission is of that organization. And if they don't, then you've got some big problems. And so that's why I believe coming through something like the pandemic, having all those bases and beneath you and what you believe will ultimately, as you adjust and pivot, have the organization be successul. So I'll stop there for a minute. And Tassie, I'm not sure if we're doing questions or thoughts, but I wanted to just open it up now for any comments, questions, thoughts around some of these principles that I've been able to use as I've led organizations for almost 40 years.
Thank you. That's awesome. GJ, does anybody have a question that they'd like to? Yes, come on up, Fred.
I don't know if you need me to come up,
Yes,
Mr.
yes.
Hart. Thank you for the lecture. It's great principles.
Can you hear?
Many of us have taught Wooden's principles as well, so thank you for acknowledging that. Could you talk a little bit about what the new normal is going to be like? Because for many of us, the issue of students remote learning, in-person learning, it's much harder to show how much we care. And as educators, our motto is, they only care how much we know if they know how much we care. But that's really hard to do in a remote Zoom setting, and different models. So I'd love to hear your ideas about how we can cope in the new normal. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question. It's just like me doing this morning. I'm on 2-hour time difference, and I'm talking to my iPad here to all of you folks, and you don't feel that energy, so I get it totally. And that new normal, by the way, I think will continue to evolve, but the way that in an organization, very different from how you all are educating students, you probably don't have this opportunity, but is that you do need to create environments where people can come together and see each other, even if it's less often than what they might do in a regular work environment or an environment what it was pre-pandemic, and bring them together to at least get the opportunity to share and see each other and get to visit in a way that they feel a part of something bigger than themselves. I'll say that having emotion and being able to show people that you care, I think people get that through this medium of being able to educate or communicate like we're doing this morning. I think people get that emotion can carry through the screen to them. It's never going to be as good as an in-person environment for sure. And I will say that I laugh because it's one of the biggest challenges as a decentralized organization becomes as a result of something like the pandemic. Now, in my particular case, I probably don't have a better answer for you, because what I remind people is we're at the front lines of serving people food, and you touch people every single day. You can't do that virtually. So we have a little different perspective of it. And it's one that that I remind the people that work at our headquarters office that, like, hey, you need to get out there with the people that are out there doing it. They don't get a break from, working from their home. They have to be there on the front line. So I don't have a great answer for it, other than to say that I do believe that people can feel whether or not you care for that person in a way that resonates with them through whether virtually or in person. Always in person is better.
We have another question, Damien.
I'm curious if you could share some of the creative things that team members did as a reaction to the pandemic to keep business going.
Well, I would say that I mentioned earlier, our restaurants were really going into the pandemic were not well suited to do off-premise, third-party, a different occasion than what a in-restaurant occasion might look like. And so, to me, some of the greatest innovation and creativity were, okay, how do I serve my guests when they can't come into my restaurant because they're not allowed to come into my restaurant? How do I, not go out of business and adjust to whether or not I have the right technology, which they didn't at the time? And how do I let people, the guests, know that I have these new ways of being able to satisfy what their needs might be? And so, the creativity that was created around how do you operate in a strip center, in the middle of that strip center, and have curbside. There's nobody coming in the parking lots. So now you can transform a parking lot. We had people that we've never done drive-through in the case of Torchy's, and we had operators come up with triple drive-throughs or drive around from their restaurants to be able to service guests. I mean, it's amazing when you allow people to use their brains, what can happen. And granted, you put yourself at risk in some respects, but being able to continue to drive our business forward when it's not in the old fashioned way of what you're used to was amazing. And so things like how you adapt in that environment. How do you make sure that the food is safe, or how do you make sure that people feel comfortable that you're looking out for their safety in an environment like COVID? Again, being in the restaurant business, that creativity was at the restaurant level. It wasn't from us mandating certain ways of going about it. And then taking that innovation or that creativity, sharing it with the other operators in the system, helping them to think about a new way, is amazing how that energy creates a whole new environment in the organization. So one bit of innovation creates more innovation as a result. So the best thing I could just say is that we became a business that was 75% on premise to a business that was 100% off premise. And we really didn't lose much of our business all through the pandemic. I think that speaks volumes.
I'm struck by, I've never heard of Torchy. So how does a founder, a CEO like yourself have the confidence to create a new food brand? Is it from the growing population? They need to eat more? Is it they're discovering tacos? Are you cannibalizing other brands? Is it word of mouth? Is it just the best damn tacos anywhere? But where do they get that confidence to get into, create a whole new brand in a very competitive market?
Look, I think at the end of the day, I'll just say in respect to Torchy's, Torchy's has a unique positioning because it's really taking the traditional street taco and elevating it by bringing unique flavor profiles together that really haven't been done before, and doing it totally from scratch. So everything that is done in the back of the house. So the food is not processed food, it's being cooked each and every day. In terms of how do you have the courage to do something different, I'll honestly say I didn't create the brands that I work for. I was, in the case of Texas Roadhouse, a part of growing it from the very beginning. In the case of Torchy's, I came in to a founder who is just wonderful and is a chef, trained chef, but being able to bring it to the masses in a way that was presented around quality and around value. And look, at the end of the day in the restaurant business, it's really simple. I tell people this all the time. At the end of the day, it's not how pretty or how ugly that restaurant is. It's ultimately the food quality and execution that you create that will drive your success. Think about the small restaurants or the restaurants been around it where the termites are holding up the walls, but yet the food is still consistently great and they have lines out the door. So it's ultimately around executing that food. And guess what? How do you execute that food at the best possible level? Is through creating a culture where people can thrive, an environment where they feel safe and a part of something bigger than themselves, and creating that through and through. So it takes people to execute in the restaurant business. And how's an entrepreneur really work? Look, there's more in the restaurant business. I think this failure rate of people starting up a restaurant are, north of 90%. So it's a very, very hard business, and you have to find that niche and you never know where that's going to come from. And I think having that open mind and also not being afraid of failure, because at the end of the day, failure can be one of your biggest successes because what you learn from that failure.
Yes, thanks, GJ. Was wondering, as we take a look at DoorDash, other delivery services, maybe Instacart, opportunity, threat, both, what are your thoughts, and what should the entrepreneur and restaurateur of the future look to work in or around this new approach?
I'm going to answer that, Reg. Let me just first say that I want you guys to think about this for a minute. All these new ways of how we order online or how we have everything being delivered to our homes, all that environment. I'm going to relate this to the third-party delivery business in the restaurant space. That ultimately is an expensive way to get a food product to an individual, right? So if you think about Uber, Grubhub, any of these third-party providers, over the last 5 to 8 years, go look at the number of companies that have actually made money. I don't think you'll find one. Ultimately, the price that is charged from those third-party providers to the restaurant is so cost prohibitive, particularly for small restaurants, that ultimately they can't, the industry, both the restaurant as well as the third party, can't survive without passing those costs on. And that's what's something that you're going to continually to see, is that as more people are in the space, costs and the delivery of those items will continue to decline in terms of what that percentage is. In mom and pop restaurants today, they charge upwards of 30%. So whatever that item is, 30% right off the bottom line is going to that restaurant operator. By the way, we didn't have and never have had 30% margins in the restaurant business to start with. So I think you start with that premise to know that ultimately to play that game, you need to understand and go eyes wide open with that. And in the particular case of the organizations that I'm a part of, is that I encourage them to price the product upwards so that the third-party delivery can be as close to neutral to an in-restaurant dining experience as possible, which means that on the marketplace sites like DoorDash, that when you go on DoorDash and you're looking for whatever that item is, that if it's $4 in the restaurant, that it's $4.75 to get it delivered to your home. And because if you don't, ultimately it's going to drive you out of business. So to Reg's question, it is a competitive intrusion if you look at it that way. Or if you start to condition and price it accordingly, then the consumer can make their best judgment on whether or not they want it delivered at home, which is a different occasion than an in-restaurant experience. And so I think one of the things that comes out of the pandemic is where you didn't have a choice, you had to have it delivered, or because you weren't allowed into a restaurant, versus today where you are, and then you have that choice, is it for convenience, for need, or whatever that might be. So ultimately, that third party, there will be survivors in this business, and I'd suggest that DoorDash will be the main, and they currently have a 65% market share, and that they will survive through this. And ultimately, you need to partner with them as best you can, realizing that long-term, it is going to be a part of your business. There's one other piece of this, Reg, that I think is vitally important as well, is that who owns the guest information? Today, if you go through DoorDash or Uber or any of these, that your profile is owned by Uber or DoorDash versus the restaurant. So how do you long-term as a restaurant operator connect with your guests? You want to have that one-on-one relationship. And that's something that's going to be tricky as well. And again, it goes back to the partnership that you have with that third-party provider, where will they share some of that information? We're starting to crack that code now in our industry, where they will have to share that information. And so that's a piece longer term that I think is really, really important for particularly for successful larger restaurant companies, that they're going to have to control and build a one-on-one relationship with every guest that they have. And I can go into how that technology and all those work, but I think ultimately you do need to partner with them. Sorry for the long answer, Reg.
Hi, I have a question about as the industry sees increasing wages, and we're managing really thin profit margins in our business, what do you see the future of food service business in terms of facility, technology? What role do you think it plays? Do you see a smaller footprint in terms of staffing structures to be able to manage and be able to offer these higher living wages and still make a profit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe that there'll always be a place for the environment where you go into a restaurant and you are served and you enjoy that experience. I also believe that we as human beings want to have a place where we can gather and share with each other and spend time together. There will always be a place for that. I would also suggest that as we come out of COVID, that one of the reasons you see some of these restaurants doing really, really well is because of what I just said. People have been apart for so long, and now they have that opportunity to be together. However, that niche and that environment of creating that experience in a restaurant will become less and less. I do think it will be there, but we as consumers are going to have to pay for that, without a doubt. In terms of organizations, the restaurant organizations thinking about the future, I think it's vitally important that innovation continues to go around things like, how does AI become a part of the restaurant? How do you have robotics be a part of a restaurant? It may be crazy to think about, but I believe that ultimately this idea around less people being in the restaurant business because it's hard work and it's been lower paid, I think is going to continue to persist, and it will be prolonged pain for our industry because there just aren't enough people to service the needs. Now, do I have the answers to all that? No, but I think there's going to be a big divide between the what I'll call the fast casual business to the fast food business to what the established sort of higher end casual dining and fine dining. So it's going to be, I'm going to have to pay for it on the higher end, and I'm going to have to accept, I believe, ultimately a different type of experience on the lower end. And you're starting to see that now. You're seeing organizations use robotics and AI as a part of way of reducing the amount of necessary from a labor point of view. The labor challenge, we do need to pay people a living wage. That needs to occur. You can't have people living below the poverty line and do what we're doing. So I think we have to find a way to do that and do that successfully. We also have to create environments where people, again, feel part of something. And it's not just about the wage, it's about the benefits, it's about flexibility. It's around all those things that we need to create. And we need to, this is more than ever before, we need to be innovative and be accepting of trying some things that we're going to fail at to learn what is going to work. So that's kind of how I see it. It's not going to be an easy fix. It's going to evolve over time. But I'll bet you this, that in 10 years, when we look back on the restaurant business in 10 years from now, it's going to be very different than what it is today.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So layered on the challenge of COVID is the call for organizations to address issues around diversity and equity. A call that is hard on a good day. And now you have the challenge of COVID and the new normal, as you suggested. So how do you see leaders in the organization navigating this call to address those issues?
It's very difficult to hear you, to be candid. I think what your question was, how does a leader kind of survive and be successful in a post-COVID environment and all the other challenges that we're dealing with in America today, is particularly from the people side of the equation?
Yeah, around issues of diversity and equity.
Yeah,
Diversity
sure.
and equity.
Yeah, sure. Well, I will say that it's, you take the pandemic in and of itself, we've talked a lot around how we, or from my experience, how we as an organization were able to be successful through a pandemic and the likes of what none of us have ever experienced in the restaurant business, and come out of that through the things that I talked about here in the last little bit. But this whole effect about inclusion, diversity, inclusion, and equity around human beings, I think it goes back to people and culture. And ultimately, to me, we all come from different walks of life. We may be all different colors, breeds, different parts of the world. I think the fundamental belief around taking care of people, showing that you care, and having an environment where it's built around trust and transparency and communication, I think that will ultimately make people feel a part. I don't care who you are, what you are, you're a part of something bigger than yourself. And leaders have to lead that way to be successful. So to me, this whole issue around diversity, equity, and inclusion is all part of that. And it's something that you have to live through and through all the leaders in your organization and continually work on that. It's almost as if you say human being is a human being, and they all have an opportunity to thrive and be successful. And your job as a leader to get them to exceed their own expectations is one that is hard to do, but when you do it, you become a great leader as a result. So I know that's not a great answer, but I'll tell you, I've been saying to people all along is that if you create an environment and a culture that people feel a part of something special, then ultimately all those issues are handled as a result of that belief system.
Well, GJ, we can't begin to thank you enough for your time this morning, particularly so early where you are. Thank you so much. We have this little certificate of appreciation that we're going to be sending you. Tony's trying to get a picture of it now. So we will be sending you a certificate of appreciation. We're sorry that you couldn't be here, and there's a gift in the mail. It's in the mail. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks for indulging me for a little bit, and hope the rest of the conference is good. Tony, good to see you, and thank you for letting me see the audience.
You bet. Well, thank you so much, and we hope you have a great day.
We look forward to seeing you on campus, and from all of us at NENA Cree, thank you.